Hello, welcome to the Quakes Motel. My name's Conan. In today's video, I'm going to run through a new template which I've made for the MPC. It's specifically for mastering. I've had quite a few requests for it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run through the plugins which I've put in the template and explain why I've put them in that particular order. Let's jump in. Okay, so before I get too deeply into this, a couple of disclaimers. And I've said this in previous videos about mastering in the MPC. In my opinion, and I think I've proven this and I've shown this in videos, you can do a master in your MPC, which is decent enough, but it's not a replacement for working with a mastering engineer. And I've explained that on numerous occasions. The point of this template is to give you guidance. The point of this template is to enable you to master a track in your MPC to a level where you can send it to record labels, or you can sell beats, or you could even release your tracks on Bandcamp, etc. But I would say that if you are considering releasing the tracks properly on your own label, perhaps your own digital label, then perhaps think about speaking to a mastering engineer for at least consultancy, or for them to actually master the track. So it's not a total replacement, but the point of the videos that I've made on mastering in the MPC is I want to show that it is possible to master a track in the MPC. So this template is going to be guidance. This template is not a magic bullet, one size fits all. You will suddenly have professional masters in your MPC. What it is it's a template which will give you guidance. I'm going to explain why I've used the plugins that I've used, why I've put them in that particular order. But you have to remember that when you master a track, when you mix a track, it's the same with mixing as well. Every single track is different. Please remember that there is not one size fits all. If you see videos or people saying this is the way to mix a snare drum, or this is the way to master a track, or this is the way to mix vocals, just be a little bit apprehensive, because every single track is different. Every snare drum, every vocal, every track that you would master, they're going to be different. So there is no one particular magic bullet that will suit everything. It just doesn't exist. And it does, I try and be zen about it, but it does wind me up a little bit when I see people say this is the way to mix a snare drum, or etc., because it's very misleading. And if you're just starting out, or if you're learning, well, we're always learning every single day, but if you're just starting out, you're a sponge to those kind of things. You know, you see them in videos and you think, oh right, well then that's the way to do it because he's doing it like that. And I just want to, you know, I guess I want to warn people that there is no magic bullet. It takes time, it takes work, it takes a lot of time to learn and understand what you're doing. I wish there was a magic bullet. I really do wish there was. So just to reiterate, this mastering template is guidance. And I think it's guidance based on many, many years as a mastering engineer. I've been mastering since 1997. I've been mixing since the mid-80s. So it is based on a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience. So therefore, I'd like to think that it does carry some weight when I say that this mastering template is not going to master every single song and master it perfectly. Take it from me, it's not going to do that. So if you want a magic bullet, perhaps this isn't the video for you, and I'll save you some time. Although you have had to listen to me ramble on for about 5 minutes about it. But yeah, it's not a magic bullet. But I hope that in some ways that will inspire you, that sparks you and thinks, okay, well, if this isn't a magic bullet, then why is he doing it in this way? Let me learn, let me arm myself with this knowledge going forward. So no more rambling, let's jump in. As I've explained in previous videos on mastering, I think the best thing to do is have a mastering head. Don't produce, mix and master all at the same time. Produce your track, arrange your track, mix your track, and then bounce it as a stereo pre-master, and then take that stereo pre-master and load it into your MPC, maybe with this mastering template. Load it onto an audio track. You can see what I've got loaded up here is I've got the audio track for the pre-master. Then we have a reference 1 track, reference 2 track. You can have as many references as you like, but I've just had reference 1, reference 2. And the aim of that is I've also explained in many videos that referencing is a really important part of mastering and mixing as well. So you can load in your favorite tracks. I would say try not to think necessarily of loading in your favorite tracks, because they might not be good tracks to reference against for mastering that particular track. So let's just say, for instance, I've made a nice French disco type sort of house track. So what I want to do is I want to think, what French disco house tracks sound really, really good in a club or sound really, really good on the radio. So it won't necessarily be my favorite track that I'm going to reference against. It will be a track that I know sounds good. One that instantly springs to mind is Around the World by Daft Punk. If you've seen my videos of mastering, you'll know that I use it as a reference track a lot because I've DJ'd that track since it came out in clubs, played it in clubs rather than DJ. I've played it in clubs, massive clubs, Ministry of Sound, Pasha. I've played it on really, really good sound systems, and I've also played it on really bad sound systems, and it always sounds good. So for a reference for me, for that kind of music, that kind of genre, I always go to it. So I would load that into reference one or reference two. You can also say, for instance, you have mastered the track already, or it's been mastered by somebody else and you want to reference that master, you can drop that into reference. Pre-master is where you're going to load your pre-master. So they're on audio tracks, and the way that they're set up in the mix as well is they're set to 0, 0, 0, 0. And the way that I have this set up as well to give me 8 different effect slots is I have 4 slots on the pre-master. Then on the in-out section, I have routed that to Submix 1, and Submix 1 is routed to the main out. So I've got 4 further slots on Submix 1. The reason why I haven't put any effects on the main out is because that's where my references are sent to, and I don't want those to be tainted or flavored, or I don't want them touched, basically. So I've sent them straight to output 1 and 2 on the MPC 1. You could send it to different outputs on the X and the Live 2, but it's sent to outputs 1 and 2 here, although it doesn't really matter actually, to be honest, because as long as you make sure when you bounce it, you choose that main output, the main output that you're sending it to, more importantly. So as you can see, the references are sent to output 1, pre-master to Submix, so that gives me more effect slots. If you need, and I've said this a few times before, if you need more than 8 slots or more than 8 effects on a master, then you probably need to go back to the mix. You really don't need that many. In all the years that I've been mastering, I think maybe 4 or 5 is probably my average. 4 or 5 pieces of outboard equipment, or 4 or 5 effects if I'm working in the box. On the MPC, I think sometimes 6, I think I've probably used on some of the videos that I've shown. Now I've got this template set up with 8, and I'll explain that. I'm not going to use all 8, and that's the point. You don't have to use all 8. You need to listen to the pre-master and decide what you want to use, and that's the learning curve. That's why it's not a magic bullet, because years of experience go into constantly listening to tracks and knowing straight away it needs more more low end. It needs more mids. It needs compressing slightly. It needs its dynamic range reduced. It needs to be limited. It needs a bit of harmonics. It needs some saturation. Those kind of things. You need to sit down and assess your pre-master. When I master a track, for instance, I would say that 50% of my time is sat listening to the actual track in what I call listening sessions, and I will make notes and I will assess the pre-master, and I think, okay, it probably needs this, it's lacking that needs to be adjusted. Because sometimes as well, I'll listen to a track and I'll be like, it's not ready to be mastered. I'll speak to the record label, or I'll speak to the sound engineer or the original producer or my client, etc. And I would say, look, maybe go back into the studio, mix this again, maybe bring the vocals up in the mix a little bit, because those kind of things you can't really adjust in mastering. You can actually, in the box now, there are plugins available where you can do things like that, but it's preferable that you don't do that. It's preferable that it's done in the mix by the sound engineer or by you if you're mixing the track, and then the master is what takes it from 90% to 110%. It's a cherry on top. If you're having to spend a lot of time working on problems as a mastering engineer, it's probably better that it goes back to the mix engineer if that's possible. I do a lot of remastering of old music. Record labels will send me a track that has been mastered before, but it was mastered in 1975 and they want to bring it up to date. So I don't have the option of calling, the mastering engineer sat in a studio in Philadelphia in 1975. I can't call him and say, can you change the mix? Because that's not available anymore. So those kind of masters, I do spend some time doing problem fixing, but the technology that we have available now to do that is just incredible. but we don't have that technology so much in the MPC. So to summarize, it's better if you get as much done in the mix as possible before you actually master it. So starting with the pre-master, like I said, I've got 4 slots, and I start with power EQ, and the job of power EQ is surgical. So what would quite often happen is I would reduce the low end to get rid of any subs or any, low end information that you don't need, especially if it's going to vinyl. It's really important to do that. And also as well, sometimes you might want to roll off some of the highs as well, depending on the vibe of the master. You can do some EQ here. You might want to take some mud out. I don't tend to do very much EQ in the surgical, but if it is EQ, it's attenuation rather than boosting. And the reason for that is that you're going to go through a whole list of other things, a whole list of other plugins that you're going to be going into. So you need to think, if I push the highs here, then those highs are now going to have to be adjusted perhaps in compression or in saturation or in the EQ later on, because I do actually do EQ work later on. So the first EQ, power EQ, tends to be surgical. Then moving on to Soft Clipper. Now, just quickly, I want to point out as well, with Soft Clipper, obviously it's a paid for plugin. So if you don't have Soft Clipper, then this template is probably, it might load, but you won't have Soft Clipper available. I would suggest that if you're seriously thinking about mastering in your MPC, then Soft Clipper is not very expensive. It's a decent enough clipper. It's not my favorite clipper in the world, but it does the job and it's worth investing in. So the way that I've got this set up is I've basically zeroed everything. I have anti-alias on the stereo link, but other than that, everything is pretty much zeroed. But the point of a soft clipper is to reduce dynamic range. And this is where you're going to get quite a lot of your volume from. And if you've watched my videos where I have actually mastered tracks, and I will be doing some more in the very near future, you will see how I use the clipper. So it might be worth referencing those videos to see how I actually use the clipper. But I go from surgical EQ into soft clipper. Now, the next 2 plugins are not necessarily plugins that I would use every single time, but they're plugins that I've put in the chain because they might be something that you might use in a master, and I do use them in master sometimes. So I might not use the soft clipper, I might use Air Maximizer. And again, I've made a video on this. I've zeroed it, I've made the look ahead just a little bit, 0.5 milliseconds. Hard knee, everything else is zeroed apart from the release, which I've set to about 75 milliseconds, which is a decent release on the Air Maximizer. I just know that from experience. So the Air Maximizer, I've made a video on it, but again, it's about getting a bit of volume out of your track, and it's maybe, again, about reducing dynamic range. Then moving on to Air Compressor, very transparent compressor, which is why I use Air Compressor if I'm going to be mastering in the MPC. Very, very low ratio. Again, mastering is very, very subtle changes. It's not about smashing the compression. That would probably be something that you would do in the mix. So very, very low ratio, long attack because I don't want to crush the transients, short release, and again, everything else is zeroed, 100% mix. Threshold is on 0 for the moment, but you're really going to be using it to just tickle things, just to get a little bit of cohesion, a little bit of glue. Again, it's about reducing dynamic range. So those 3 plugins are mostly about getting a little bit more volume and reducing dynamic range. Then we go into Submix, and the first one in Submix is Power EQ. Now, I know I had Power EQ earlier on, but I didn't want to EQ really anything. I didn't want to boost any EQ whilst I'm still trying to get reduced dynamic range, add some compression, soft clipper, maximizer, etc. So now I would do some flavor EQ. So here, if I needed to boost the low end, so we've got a shelf. This would entirely depend on the track, but I would generally say a shelf, depending on the genre, 50 hertz is something that I tend to use around about, between 50 and 60 shelf, just purely because a lot of the music that I master is dance music and the fundamental of the kick drum is kind of down there. So I want to boost the low end, but I don't want to smash it. I don't want to, because if you start hitting too much low end, you're going to get a lot of peaks very, very quickly. Here would be where I might take some mud out. So again, it would be attenuation. 200 hertz is a guideline. Like I said, it's going to change, but 180 to 300 is where you probably want to look at. Here for clarity, so this might be something more like 5K, between 4 and 6. So kind of look at those, but I've left that at 2 because that's the initial preset on Air Power EQ, although I have changed this slightly, I think. And highs, again, you're looking at about 8K upwards. But like I said, I'm explaining the template here, but I'm not going into too much detail because I'm not actually mastering a track here. So I don't want to give you too many numbers because they change for every single track you master. So Power EQ, the point of that is it's your flavor EQ. And the next two plugins are all about flavor. We have Diode Clip, which is about introducing some saturation and some harmonics. And the one that I use more often than not, Tube Drive. Tube Drive is I've explained in videos before, is a kind of replacement for the Black Box plugin, which I use for Plugin Alliance. And I used to use the hardware a lot. There's another plugin as well, which I use in Plugin Alliance, which has completely escaped me. Is it the VSM, maybe? That's another emulation of a hardware unit that I used to use. But it's about introducing a little bit of saturation. I don't tend to go over about 5% on here. And with saturation, maybe 10%, but it's very, very subtle. You'll notice very, very quickly at this point of the effects chain, after EQ, after soft clipper, after maximizer, etc., that adding a little bit of drive, a little, 4 or 5% of saturation and drive is going to give you some really, really nice flavor and can give you a nice bit of grit and just some flavor, some character to the master. So those two plugins, Diode Clip and Tube Drive, would be what I would use to get my flavor. And then finally, Air Limiter, very important plugin on mastering. The way that I have that set up for you here is a release of 75. I've monoed it at 80 Hertz, giving you a little bit of look ahead, and I've dropped the ceiling to 0.2. The reason behind that is just to give you a little bit of headroom if you get any peaks jumping over, true peaks. You do sometimes, if I've got that set to 0.2, there are still going to be situations where, I don't want to go into too much detail, but when you your master as a WAV, and if you then change that to an MP3, you can sometimes get some overs, and the 0.2 is just going to help with that. And it just gives you a tiny little bit of room. There's room for error, I guess would be the best way to describe it. So that doesn't have to be 0.2. 0.5 is another one I see, and I do actually see some mastering engineers going all the way to a decibel below. But 0.2, 0.3 is what I tend to use. So I've set that up for you in this air limiter here for that. So that's really going through it very, very quickly and not going into too much detail and overwhelming you with numbers, because the numbers are going to be different for every single track. And some of these you can swap out as well, but I just wanted to explain, and I'm going to summarize now. Air Power EQ at the start, surgical. Then I want to reduce the dynamic range to get maximum volume. Then I want to do a bit of EQ work to maybe add some low end and add some highs and maybe some clarity and maybe dip out some mud. Then I'm going to be adding some character. So they're my character boxes, Diode Clip, Tube Drive. You can also look at Flavor, Flavor Pro, etc. But be careful. You want to be subtle. You don't want to undo all the work that you've done, basically. But saying that, if you want it to be really lo-fi, then use a plugin that makes it really lo-fi. But Diode Clip and Tube Drive are what I tend to use in the MPC if I want to imprint some character on the master. And then finishing up with Air Limiter. So there you have it. Like I said throughout the video, this isn't a magic bullet. You're not going to be able to apply this template to every single master and it just masters your tracks for you. That's not the purpose of the template. And it's not a replacement for a mastering engineer, and I've said that before as well. But what I hope that it is a foundation. If you're considering mastering your tracks in the MPC, you can use this template and it will give you a building block. It will help you get your masters in a decent place. But feel free to change out any of the plugins in there. If you don't want to buy Airsoft Clipper, change it. Use just Air Maximizer or Air Compressor. If you don't want to use Power EQ and you want to use one of the less transparent EQs, then you change the EQ. If you don't like Diode Clip and Tube Drive for character, change that for Air Flavor Pro or whatever you want to use. But the point of it is to give you some guidance and just to help you. It can be quite overwhelming when you master a track. So not even knowing where to start, what do I put first in the chain? So really, I guess rather than, downloading this free template and using it verbatim, I hope that you can download the template and use it as a starting point and you can think, okay, I need to do a bit of surgical EQ. Conan's already set that up for me. You know, that's really the aim of it. I'm not going to be able to solve all your mastering problems. And if anybody says that they can solve all your mastering problems, then they're talking BS. They can't. So again, I want to reiterate that you know, this is guidance. Learn your plugins and learn the reasons why you're putting these plugins in this order, and that's a much better way to become a better mixing engineer and a better mastering engineer. So thanks for watching. This is the Quakes Motel. My name's Conan. Till next time.